Hello folks, welcome back to the Chap's Guide. My name is Ash and I am your host on this journey through men's style, self-development and personal grooming. Now today is another one of my kind of regular updates on my view of the direction of men's style in the world, but specifically in the world which I inhabit. And that's kind of Western Europe. So gives you an idea of what I feel is happening because, you know, I like to stay tuned in to the direction of men's style, like many of us who perhaps favour a more sartorial, one might say formal approach to dressing. One could say it has been a very depressing period over the last decade, that's without doubt. And I found myself sat here before you a few times in the last few years with quite negative messages. I've talked about the death of the necktie, where, you know, I've discussed the fact that very few people these days go to the effort of wearing a tie. Even if people wear smarter clothing, a jacket or a suit, they tend to go open-necked, which is a slide away from perhaps the more formal end of the world. I've talked about the death of the dress shoe. Earlier, towards the end of 2023, where I discussed the fact that one of the biggest brands in all of men's dress shoe styles, Trickers, appeared to be teetering on the cusp of bankruptcy and, you know, may disappear from the shoe world altogether. And then we discussed the profitability of many of the other big shoe brands from Northamptonshire, maybe the epicenter of men's footwear manufacturing, certainly for Goodyear welted shoes, and how many of them are not actually that profitable, how they are barely, you know, going concerns as organizations. I've also talked about the death of standards to a degree. Last year I came to you and discussed the fact that I think it was Ascot, the horse racing venue, they have downgraded their published dress code for people coming to what was once the sort of high society event of the year, Royal Ascot. People would dress up, they would wear formal attire, which they still do have to dress in if they go into the more, you know, vaulted areas, the royal areas and so on. But for ordinary folks turning up now, the dress requirement to dress smartly has been taken away. And these seem to be the slow erosion of style in the world in which we live. This constant slip towards ever increasing, all-purveying casuality. You know, people wearing day pajamas as they go about their activities and sweat clothes, workout clothes, just to do anything but working out. In the last few years, we have seen the disappearance of some classical brands from the world of retail. We've seen Crombie, famous manufacturers of maybe some of the greatest overcoats in the world. They've disappeared. I've got one of their coats, a Crombie overcoat. It's magnificent. And it hurts me internally to know that products like that, garments of that high quality, are no longer available other than on the pre-owned market. They're just not being made anymore. Aquascutum. I was only the other day researching Cary Grant, you know, the famous men's style icon of the late 20th century. And the truth is, Cary Grant, you know, he used to buy his clothing from Aquascutum. They were one of his preferred tailors. Now disappeared. My wife's got one of their raincoats actually, and they are superb quality, Aquascutum. Again, disappeared. And even at the middle end of the market, you know, here in the UK, I used to buy most of my suits from a brand called Jaeger. Now, they used to make really good middle-price suits. I used to buy them from an outlet store, actually, not far from where I lived. So I was able to get them at a very modest price, but they made a good quality suit at a very good price. They've disappeared from the marketplace. In fact, they've been rolled up. Their brand identity was purchased, and now, you know, Marks & Spencer's, a big department store here in the UK, they now produce products under the title of Jaeger, but it's not the same thing. It's just the same name. They've bought the brand identity. And I guess we can all trace this back to the pandemic. Seems like a long time ago now, doesn't it, the pandemic? But actually, it started this very quick erosion of style because people one of the last places they had to get dressed up for was to go to work, to go to meetings, to go to conferences. And now all of these things have graduated to the virtual world, where you can comfortably sit at home in your pajamas and, you know, nobody's going to know. You can dress casually. There's no reason to curate a nice wardrobe of nice ties, nice shirts, nice sports jackets, because you're not going out to events anymore where you need to wear them. So perhaps the pandemic was more of a crushing blow to men's style than we would have imagined. And I mean, even my own observations. I went to London several times in 2023. And I went to some really nice dining houses. I went to Wilton's on Jermyn Street, and much later in the year I went to Rowley's on Jermyn Street. So Wilton's, it is quite stylish, it is fair to say. It is still, there is a dress code. You're not going to get in there wearing flip-flops and a t-shirt. You're going to look totally out of place, and it's not appropriate. So there is still a few small bastions of men's style out there. But Rowley's I went to, you know, a Jermyn Street steakhouse, not a cheap place at all. A meal for me and my family cost upwards of £300. It was a Saturday night in the middle of central London, on Jermyn Street, you know, the Sartorial sort of epicenter, the mecca of men's style. And yet on a Saturday night there were people in there dining wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I was wearing a blazer and smart clothing. But everybody else, or not everybody, but certainly a large proportion of the patrons had chosen to go casual. And of course, when you see that sliding in, when the establishment themselves then take away the dress code and you can dress as you wish, you'll see things sliding away. However, I do want to report some good news. It's not all doom and gloom, all right? I did sense, got my finger on the pulse, I did sense some improvements in 2023. And I did report earlier in the year, actually, that Marks & Spencer, big department store here in the UK, you know, national store, international, I think. In fact, they are well renowned for their core business tends to be slightly more formally men's attire, and ladies of course, but you know, most men embarking maybe in the corporate world at an entry-level job, the place they will go in this country to find a cheap suit will be Marks & Spencer's, because the suits are not great, it's fair to say. You know, they've got a sliding scale, of course. You know, they've got cheaper ones and more expensive ones. At the cheap end, you're going to be looking at polyester blends. They're not great things, but then they're inexpensive. You know, it's a foothold, it's a starting point in the suiting world. Their figures started to go up. Marks & Spencer's started to show signs of recovery. Most likely that was associated with the pandemic recovery. There has been a trend in the UK for sure of companies which had gone entirely work from home. They were starting to force people back into the workplace. They were starting to get people back in the office under this sort of maybe misguided opinion that people work harder when they're in an office. I'm not sure it's true. It certainly doesn't work for me. I'm just as productive, even more so, when I'm at home, in a home environment, and I don't have to drive an hour at the beginning and the start of my day just to get to work. That time is more productively employed at home, working in my situation. But it was a sign that things were starting to change. And what is my report now at the first quarter of 2024, first few months now under our belt? What do I think? I believe the green shoots are still showing. I believe that there are signs that there has been a bounce in the sartorial style. And why do I think that? Well, first of all, I keep an eye on the sales figures of the big brands like Marks & Spencer, and it is true. They have shown strong trading figures in the last 12-month period. In fact, the best trading figures they've had for a long time. It is a sign that they are bouncing back. Additionally, I've gone to Statista, which is a global market insights index where you can get information which relates to pretty much anything. But I've been sort of inquisitive around men's style. And it tells us, in fact, that men's suit sales, and I'm using suits as my sort of demarcation figure here. I acknowledge that blazers and, you know, sports jackets, tweed jackets, they fall into that category too. But suits tends to be a good staging point if you want to get you keep your finger on the pulse, see what things are happening out there. And they tell me that international suit sales in 2023 outperformed any previous of the 5 or 6 years beforehand. Now we can take aside about 2 of those years, which included the pandemic period. But 2023, not just a strong recovery from the pandemic, but actually a good performing year under any sort of metric. And it shows a good sign for the future ahead. What can I tell you? Well, the suit market in 2024 is anticipated to be worth about 18 billion US dollars. So it's still a market which is really substantial, really big market globally. That shows an annual growth of about 1% year on year. No, it's not stratospheric growth, that's true. And there have been decreases in growth over the last few years in the UK and the USA. Strong market growth in places like China, which leads the world in suit sales, believe it or not. In the UK, I can tell you that 2.6 million suits as articles will be sold in the next 12 months, which equates to about $0.9 billion, so just under $1 billion. In the United States of America, about 4.9, just under 5 million suits as such pieces will be sold, which equates to 2.12 billion US dollars. So strong marketing. These brands which are out there who are providing these goods for us, it's still worthwhile for them. Globally, 97.8 million suits will be sold by 2027. So really, really substantial numbers. But as I say, the new world, China, India, they are definitely leading the world in suit sales at the moment as they come online really with the westernized ideology around business attire and so on. And they, of course, increasingly ply their trade in the old world. So Europe, North America. So they are dressing more like the countries which they maybe aspire to be, or certainly aspire to do business with. So my own observations, just rounding up, I don't intend this to be a long rambling talk here, but my own observations, I definitely see signs of more sartorial attire entering the lexicon of men's sort of lives. Why do I say that? Well, I was looking at the winter spring show of Prada just recently, who tend to they do dabble into the more sartorial world of men's style, and absolutely their winter show was awash with more traditional men's suiting and outerwear, overcoats and the like, dominating the catwalk. And I saw that as a very positive sign, because if the fashion houses are focusing on more traditional sartorial outfits, structured clothing, it's likely we will see that reflecting in the ordinary world in the years ahead. The years where people were wearing designer sweatpants and jogging clothes on the catwalk, they may be diminishing. We might be seeing, more sartorial outfits returning. I went to, looking back over the last 12-month period, in June of last year, I was invited as a guest to Dijon Skinner, number 10 Savile Row, and I was very fortunate to have a chat with Mr. William Skinner, who's the chairman of Dijon Skinner, which is of course one of the most vaulted men's bespoke tailors on Savile Row. They've got royal warrants around the world. They're fabulous tailors, and if I had the money, believe me, I would be beating a path to their door. But their suits are around about 5,000 British pounds for their entry-level bespoke suit. But I was amazed in discussion with Mr. Skinner, who told me, as a company, they have never been busier. There is really strong interest in bespoke suiting at the moment, and if you've got the money, people are seeing bespoke suiting as that delineation between those and the other people who don't have the money. In the past, perhaps that delineation used to be signed or signalled by much more ostentatious things. Maybe you would drive a Mercedes G-Wagon or an Aston Martin. You would wear a Richard Mille watch or an Audemars Piguet or a Patek Philippe. Now, Maybe it's a bit more subtle. It is things like bespoke suiting. It is bespoke footwear, bespoke shirting. These little subtle things which people only tend to notice if they are themselves in the know. These ostentatious displays of wealth, wristwatches, cars and so on. Maybe it's losing favour. Maybe it's losing favour. Just the other day, I regularly have a conversation with my colleague here on YouTube, the British Dapper, Chris, who's the host on that channel. We have a conversation, and we were chatting the other day on Zoom because we've got a meet and greet coming up in London shortly, and we were talking about that. But I said to him, how are things? You know, how are you perceiving the style world? And he said, do you know what? I was in town. He lives in a medium-sized town in Middle England, all right? So not a fancy place, certainly not a place awash with millionaires. But he told me, I was in town the other day, walking down the high street, and I noticed men wearing better clothing, tweed jackets. I noticed men wearing dress hats. He said, I saw a man wearing a bowler hat in my town. And this is not something I would routinely have seen a little while ago. And you know what, when he said that to me, I was out and about myself shortly after in a fairly big city, Bristol, and I noticed myself more men wearing sports jackets, more men wearing pea coats like I'm wearing now, or maybe more structured outerwear. I took that as a really good sign. And you know, my own observations lead me to think I am seeing more men's style. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way that we're on the return to, you know, the old sartorial world of the 50s and 60s here in the UK, the Cary Grant and David Niven style of dressing. But what I do think is we have reached the bottom of the slide of casuality. We've hit rock bottom. And it's always been my belief that we would hit that point, and when we did so, we would start to bounce upwards. Because it has always been my thought that the reason why people started to dress more casually was not just because of comfort. It was a sign of non-conformity. When the last generation were wearing neckties and blazers, the next generation want to be perceived differently. In the years gone by, they started wearing Harrington jackets and things like that. But now, they started wearing jogging wear, the most casual they could display publicly. And we've hit the bottom, and everybody is dressing the same. Everybody's wearing designer casual wear. How do you show non-conformity when everybody is dressed as casually as possible? The obvious answer, you start to dress more formally or with more structure to your clothing. You start to perhaps wear a jacket. You start to maybe move away from jogging trousers to jeans, and then to chinos, and then to flannel slacks, and that's the way it goes. We are starting maybe the ascent of sartorial standards having reached rock bottom. That is my view. Now, this might take 5 to 10 years to see that bounce noticeably changing, but I am seeing changes. I am seeing the green shoots, as I am seeing around me here. I can see daffodils. I can see the regrowth which spring will bring in a month or so. But I'm seeing it in men's sartorial style, and I am delighted to see that. So for those of us who like being very different from everybody else because we dress more sartorially, make the most of it. I can see things changing. I can see things moving back upwards, and men now showing their non-conformity by dressing in a more structured way. Mark my words, we'll come back in a year and we'll see if I'm wrong. Hopefully it will rescue some of the traditional brands which are teetering on the brink. There we go. Let me know if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm right, or tell me if you've got a totally different viewpoint. Leave it in the comments section below, or drop me an email. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, subscribe. If you want to practically support the channel, you can buy me a coffee, quick one-off thing, or you can become a patron and be part of this dialogue with me, with my patrons on our channel, where I make additional video content for them and have a much more intimate conversation over there. And you will find the links to all that in the show notes below. So until the next time, take care, do your bit for the style revolution, and I will see you again very soon.